this is Kimberlea, and Yoga Snack is our bite-sized podcast where Robbie and I serve up nourishing discussions on yoga, astrology, nourishment, and mindset.
We mix wisdom with personal experiences to serve up quick, insightful conversations that nourish your practice and add flavor to your daily life.
Ready for a quick bite of wisdom? Let's dig in.
Welcome to Yoga Snack. Today we're going to talk about surrender.
Yeah.
And I don't think I remember exactly how to say the Sanskrit name. Do you?
I'll go for it.
I was going to hand this to you.
I know. We're working with a new mic setup today. We're on the fly. Ishvara Pranidhana.
Yes.
Ishvara Pranidhana.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, and that is surrender. And it's kind of a touchy one because that terminology of like God, and that's such a triggering word for so many, and I appreciate that too. But maybe it's source or universe, but it is this surrender to something larger than yourself. And it's when we come out of that egoic, willful state and we learn to fall back and surrender. And it's even, I think, maybe a form of trust, which I think is really hard. And it's kind of just coming up to me currently in my head. This year for my intention, I picked the word float. And I broke it down. It's fear, less, open, and trust. And that's, I think when I'm in the ocean, I feel that ability to be held and supported by this energy that clearly I am not in charge of. And it could take me under at any moment and do with it what it wants in that moment. And it's not even necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have an agenda for me. But I think what I've learned over the years is that when I learn to surrender and lay back and allow, there really is this communion with that source, and it doesn't feel threatening, even though it is for so many people and can be. But there is this deep sense of being held by something other than my own effort. And to have those moments of suspension, it's like, it like rehydrates my soul. And that float word, obviously, if you've listened to this, I love the water and I'm such a water person, and I scuba and I free dive. But I used to be afraid of the water. And it's like that fighting and this fear of being swallowed up, I think, by something. And then of course, freaking Jaws really ruined it for me when I was a kiddo. But that word for this year for me was very much about, there has to be something that I can feel or tune into that's not in the water, and just sort of this organizing pulse of the universe. And I can feel it in the water. And I believe water holds consciousness too. But there has to be something out here on the land that I can find access to. So when I'm in that state of like over efforting or overdoing, it's like, how do I pull back and surrender to what is? And I don't think it's the same as like giving up, and that's maybe an interesting thread. It's like, what is that difference between like letting go and giving up?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think letting go, there's probably still a little bit of efforting, right? Like there's probably still like you're moving in some sort of direction. Maybe not. Maybe it's I'm missing the point on that, but like, I don't know. I feel like giving up is like
you're throwing in the towel.
Yeah. Maybe it's like an absence of hope, like,
or trust even in the way that this is all supposed to unravel. Right? Because sometimes we have this idea of the way our life is supposed to look, and it's actually not. And to really cling and cling and cling. And then there's that like throwing in the towel, like give up, never, I'm not even going to try anymore, versus surrender, I think has that undertone of still participating, right? And allowing And there's not that it's active, it's this surrendering back. And so it's very passive, but it's not this, I think that lack of hope that we allow life to still express itself through us as us, and we learn to still sort of show up, but that complete surrender in the yoga asana practice is Shavasana. It's like we work this whole time to get to that one very important pose. And I'm always sad, like when people skip out on it. Even in my own home practice, sometimes I'm like 30 seconds and I'm done, but it's like that gesture of letting go and allowing things to integrate and to come into me in a way that it's changing me, but it's not out of my ego and my will. I taught a class last week, and it was very much about observing that pulsation inside of us. Like I had everybody start with noticing their breath without changing it. And that's actually really, really hard to do, because the moment you notice it, the first thing you want to do is participate with it. Like you notice it and you're like, oh, I could make that feel better, by taking a little deeper breath in. And it's an instinct, I think, but being able to pull back and notice, like, what is breathing you and what is beating your heart. And that has nothing to do with your will. And then allowing that reverence for that thing that has nothing to do with your will to be at the forefront, I think is really powerful. It's a powerful source to tune into. It's like learning to lay back in the ocean and the waves and the current and let it carry and hold without fighting it and like punching it and be like, stop that. And even in our body in the ocean, like if you're carrying tension and holding, you become more compact and dense and you sink instead of swim, right? Or instead of float. And it shows up there. And I've really had water in the deepest part of my soul, I think, for such a long time. And I can always talk about it in that. But it goes beyond that. Like we can look to nature and the elements for that. But in our yoga practice, Shavasana is corpse pose. We're practicing dying to who we were before, letting go of who we were before, and trusting that the practice has changed us. And when we're reborn again, when we sit back up, we're new, right? We've been changed, hopefully, and it actually doesn't, like, it maybe took our will at the beginning of it, but we have to let go at the end of it and trust that the changes and the practice and whatever's emerging through us, it's like this yoga magic is occurring, and it really has nothing to do with our will. Like if you laid there and like, I'm gonna force my hamstring to receive the it's gonna maybe we can talk on it like a biomechanical level, but you're not gonna force that's even in the practice. Like when you force your body to open, it can result in injury. And so where is that interplay of surrendering our will momentarily and letting that deep intelligence that we're born with be at the forefront of how we're moving, and then we apply our will behind it. And I think we have to have practices of surrender. Like Shavasana is still very hard for me after all of these years. My mind just wants to go, and that's my ego, it's my mind, it's my will, it's all this churning. But there are these moments that I can sort of like capture and be in this state of allowing and receiving, because there's things that you just can't actively do or receive, right? Wisdom is one of them. You're not going to study. You can gain knowledge, but not wisdom. And that deep wisdom and integration and trust in the pulsation of life, I think we have to be in that place occasionally. I think some of the yogic texts say you can be there all the time. I'm not wholly convinced of that, or maybe for me, I don't want to speak for anyone else. If you're in a state of Ishvara Pranidhana all the time, amazing. Yeah. Comment below. We'd like to have you on the podcast.
Yeah. It's one that like I feel like sometimes I should be in more, and I'm like at like 15 minutes I'm like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm like, where's my blessings? And I feel
and the shoulding, right?
Yeah,
the shoulding.
Yeah.
I should. That's will. That's ego.
Yeah. Even I should be softening into this experience. I should be letting things come to me that are for me. But a lot of times I get into that like, I'm going to make this happen, mindset.
Yeah. And and that's part of the human predicament too, right? Like we have egos and wills. And when I hear people like ego death, I'm like, ooh, be careful. You need that.
Yeah.
But we need to have places where it's suspended and that we are immersing ourselves in that trust of the divine. And divine is whatever you need it to be. I think there's a lot of religion and religiosity that's really wounded a lot of people. And so that word, I remember in teacher training, everybody was sort of like dancing around the word a lot of times with God, because it is such a triggering word for so many. And I think it was for me a long time ago, like, and now I'm more like source or universe or, but I recognize that there is some sort of intelligent pulsation that's organizing the universe and the stars and the planets. And that's also inside of me. It's organized me, but I have an ego and a will, whereas the tree outside that spiraled and formed itself like my spiral and helix of DNA, it doesn't have an ego or will. It just is a tree. And I have this beautiful experience of being human and having a different layer of consciousness. And that's part of it. But to be in a place where we're not just forcing all the time or thinking that we can do something about everything. Because there are just times in your life where the answer is let go. It's like, have you ever done the monkey bars?
Mm-hmm. Not well, but
right? Think about like your second grade self. Mm-hmm. And there's a beautiful analogy. Like you've got your hands on the monkey bars, your feet are dangling. And it's like there's this moment where you reach for another monkey bar and you have both hands on a bar. But in order to move forward, you have to let go. And there is this brief moment where you're no longer tethered. And that's so scary, right? It's so, so scary and confronting to our ego and to our sense of self and accomplishment, right? And that ability to like suspend ourselves and trust that there's something else that we're going to be able to reach for down the road without maybe knowing exactly what it is or what it's going to look like. I think we have to practice that. I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again if we have. The physical practice, when we enter Shavasana, we're practicing dying. Mm-hmm. What is the ultimate letting go?
It's letting go of this life, of this body.
Right, exactly.
This whole experience.
Yes, right? And if we have only identified with our body and our possessions and our accomplishments in life, mm-hmm. when we come up to that edge of surrendering this body, because that's our body wants to live, our body wants to be here, it is always working towards life. But when there is a point of needing to move beyond that and you are clinging to life, I sense that it's going to make it harder to transition. Yeah. Right? And the places that let me try to say it this way. My teacher, she would say, we're practicing dying, literally dying every time we enter Shavasana. So when we end up in that ultimate letting go, we can transition without suffering and clinging. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want, and that's at the end of life when people have that, like, it's okay to let go. It's okay to move on. I'm going to be okay. In that there is that permission that has to be given. Wow, there is a lot going on behind us, you guys. Sorry about it. They're picking up that noise. But there's a lot of potential to like really over identify and hold on to this experience, which at the end of it all can create an immense amount of suffering. And it's fear-based.
Yeah.
And like my word float, fearless, open, and trust, it's like we have to be in those places of surrendering to that grander scheme of life and trusting that probably this isn't it for our energy and for the way that we are redistributed into the cosmos, or, whatever happens. Nobody knows what happens. Nobody knows. So I think that that's an interesting thing to really understand. Like, that's why we're doing Shavasana.
Right. And that's why we're doing yoga compared to other exercise modalities, because we're not just working with our big muscles, right? We're working with that subtle energy body.
Yes.
And also practicing these matters of like maybe the soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think this is one of this is what makes yoga different, like what you're saying. And I had a Sanskrit teacher years ago, and she said, we can't lose the Ishvara Pranidhana. We're losing then the essence of what the potential of this practice is bringing to our entire whole being, our whole self. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you said. It's like we can squeeze it out, but then it just becomes maybe calisthenics with some mindfulness. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, right? It's okay. It's okay. Yoga is an invitation, not an obligation. Yeah. And that's perfectly suitable and fine. But at the essence of what the wisdom tradition of this practice is offering and inviting you into is that whole perspective of there is something beyond your will and ego that has organized you, that wants you here. And that if you learn to align with it and surrender, you actually maybe experience more joy, more peace, not because you're being rewarded, right? And I think that's what's really hard to unpack, because like you said earlier, it's like you want the fruits of your action to be rewarded, and the reality.
Done the practice. Now where's my boon?
Yes, right. And that's, guess what is leading that? Ego. Yeah. And that's not really letting go. That's not true surrender. That's not allowing life to move through you as you. And you still have to show up, right? And that's the thing. It's like the giving up, right? It's where we like throw in the towel and we're like, fuck it all. And there's times, right? Like you need to recognize when you're running into a wall. But I think that's letting go and allowing and shifting and pivoting and changing directions instead of just throwing your hands up in the air and say it's not worth it, So it's a tricky one to talk about. It's a tricky one. I'm surrendering to the fact that there's some noise behind us and there's just nothing I can do about it. I'll tell a funny story. I was teaching a yoga retreat. I was leading a yoga retreat in Bonaire, and we were out in the Kanuku, which is the sort of the outback. We're not near the ocean. And we were in this earth ship, which is this really beautiful, incredible structure. If you don't know what an earth ship is, Google it. But it's a movement of sustainable housing, and like it's stuccoed with recycled tires and glass bottles. It's like really beautiful, and they're always circular. So anyways, that doesn't have anything to do with the story. But I was teaching, but it was outdoors, right? So we're underneath part of the structure, but it's an open aired. And there are these little bugs in Bonaire called no-see-ums.
Okay.
You know why they're called no-see-ums? No see them. You can't see them.
Nice.
And there's these little tiny things. And in Bonaire, most of the time the wind is blowing. There's a trade wind and it kind of keeps all that stuff at bay. But this particular day, the wind was down and almost not there at all. And they come, and they don't just come one, they come all. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to teach a workshop. And I'm like, you can't see me, but I'm like touching my nose and my ears. And they're like, and everybody's annoyed too. And it's just this thing that's happening. And I had this moment where I was just like, this is my circumstance. Mm-hmm. I am not going to be able to swat these away. It's still uncomfortable. But if I'm going to teach, I'm going to have to lead and set an example. And I'm going to have to just allow this to be what it is and move on. Like, let go of the idea that this shouldn't be happening. Yeah. Right? How many times do we end up in that place of like, this shouldn't be like this? Like, yeah, and it is. Now what? Mm-hmm. And giving ourselves those pauses. And I think we have to practice it because our ego is so strong and so seductive and so alluring to convince us that we don't deserve this. You should not be having these bugs crawl up your nose right now. How dare this be the circumstance and situation? And, and we can spend all of the time and energy. Like I could have really ruminated on it, right? And I could have even stopped practicing or teaching and the thing is like eventually it was still happening, but I was able to still stay on course and not let the distraction deter me. So it's not like I gave up, right? I had to let go of something in order to proceed, in order to grab that next monkey bar ring, right? Or whatever. So that's kind of the maybe a good metaphor to lean on and to finish up here. Do you have anything else that stands out for you?
No, as you were telling that story, my mind went to baseball. There's a big those types of bugs happened in Cleveland, where I'm roughly from. So I don't want to get too far into a baseball story. It's kind of the same story. The bugs showed up. Well, it was baseball playoffs. Cleveland team against the New York Yankees, and Cleveland big underdogs. They're at home. It's in Cleveland. Okay. And in Cleveland, they call them midges, these little flying bugs. Okay. You could see them, once they show up, you can see them. So they may not be as small as the ones in Bonaire, but,
but probably still as affronting.
Right. So they come off the lake. So they're right on the Great Lakes. Okay. And, as this game's going on, there's this pitcher for the Yankees who's on the mound, and the game's getting tight at the end, and these bugs show up, and they just start like landing all over his neck. And he's like swatting them as he's trying to play this game, and clearly it's affecting his ability to focus. And so, as you're telling that story, I'm like, I've seen this before.
Yeah, right.
And it happened on the baseball diamond.
Right.
But it's that same thing. Like, these bugs showed up. He wasn't expecting these little midges to show up, but they did. And Cleveland ended up winning.
And to only be able to perform under ideal circumstances, right, in our life. And so I think we have to practice that surrender. And even it's surrendering to our monkey mind sometimes. We're like, Jesus criminy, my brain is going 1,000 miles, and that's especially for my ADHD brain, is going 1,000,000 miles a minute. And even surrendering to the fact that this mind is so busy right now, and it can't land on things. Like there's ways to even practice and pull and come into that observer state when that ego and willfulness is trying to take over. And I call myself out too now. It's like I'm forcing it. I don't want to force. I want to collaborate. I want to participate. I want to allow. I want to, like there's just a different language. And there was years ago a book called Power versus Force. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember who it's by, but maybe I'll try to figure that out and put it in the show notes. Really, really interesting thing to start to unpack, because I do think we become more powerful when we learn how to surrender and allow. But it's not the same as giving up. So it's a little dicey because our will and our ego wants to jump in and make us do the thing. And we need it though. But without discernment and understanding and practices that allow us to really train ourselves into accepting and allowing when life is demanding that from us, I think we put up unnecessary resistance.
Sure.
So
I know I do.
Me too. Welcome to the club. I bet you guys do too. So what are you resisting? And what are your practices to help you not resist anymore? So let us know. We really appreciate who you are, who's listening out there, and commenting is free. Liking the podcast is free. Sharing the podcast is free. And so, yeah, we really appreciate all of that, and want to know what you want to learn more about. This is the end of our journey on the Yamas and Niyamas. Yeah. We did it. We made it through. So we'll see what we come up with next, but we'd love to hear your suggestions. So anything else?
No, I'm excited to see where we go next.
I know. Yeah. YouTube channel. I have Insight Timer Saturday class. I'm talking about myths and the asanas right now. I'll put some links in the show notes below for those things. My YouTube channel has a bunch of content I just added from an old studio, online studio that I had, and I'm just offering all my stuff up for free now. So check out the YouTube channel. And my retreat to Greece in October is going to be unforgettable. There's still some space, so I'll put that in the show notes too. And then we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Bye.